In this episode, Gray Cook breaks down the deadlift and why it may trump the squat.
We get a lot of questions about some of our favorite functional exercises, and I can't imagine a situation where I don't revert back to some form of deadlifting. Right here, we're just looking at the body positions in a squat, whether the weight's in the back or the weight's up front. It doesn't really matter. The squat, you can see we're maxing out quite a few joints. And there is a risk reward that's going on there when we go into a squat. So some people are natural born squatters and they just do it so perfect, we all know we'll probably never get there. But this is a high mobility demand. Some people aren't good body weight squatters, but when they lift, they use the compressive force of the lift to somewhat coil their spring. However, what we see, those people actually plateau and they start having problems when they cross a certain level of lifts. In this lift, the deadlift, we look at the hips going backward, the tibia is quite a bit more vertical than it is right here in the squat, and we don't see a lot of stress on the joints. Huge amount of tension on the fascia, on the muscular system, but basically we're coiling the spring a different way. And this sort of came to me over a process of time, shooting a lot of videos with Brett Jones talking about squatting and deadlifting, and we did a kettlebell DVD called Dynami, where we really get into the difference of how your deadlift becomes your swing or your kettlebell snatch, whereas your squat becomes your push press, your clean, or your jerk movement. And what I want people to know is the risk reward is just in favor of the deadlift for most people. Now, there is some criteria to doing a deadlift safely, and our criteria is basically a little test that we do in the FMS called the active straight leg raise. Now, this basically, gets you to a pass point for that leg raise as soon as you pass the opposite knee. But it's really telling us that those hips aren't restricted in their path backward. Now, we've got another piece of criteria. We like to see somebody have what we call a pretty good toe touch. And the toe touch, because it's got a rounded back, scares the heck out of people. But there's no load here. There's no load on the spine. So really the reason we like the toe touch is we don't want to see any points of restriction anywhere around there. The points of restriction aren't so you'll have the range of motion to lift. The points of restriction you may have will distort your motor control. So I need a smooth weight shift backward and a graceful bend forward, simply to tell me that the pathways of motor learning and mobility are on. Once I know those restrictions aren't present, I can start training you to coil this spring. Now, if I don't check your leg raise first and at least get a set of twos on the FMS, we're gonna have a problem. Even though you may have a set of twos on the FMS, if you don't have a clean toe touch, we're gonna wanna work that pattern. It happens really quick. We do a little toe touch progression. We put a little board under your heel or your toe, and we will basically monkey with your weight shift back and forth and just get you smoothly touching your toes. Once you've done that, you're not gonna be in a situation where you have to overcoach the deadlift at all. And I do this across all age groups because you can always control the range of motion that they go down. You can bring the weight up. We have a few other options though. When we see somebody deadlifting, you've got the foot position. They can either grab the bar here and go wide with the feet, or they can take hands on the outside of the feet. Only people with the greatest amount of mobility will be able to get that deadlift outside their feet. Most people will opt a sumo deadlift and come inside their feet. But I want you to pay attention to that vertical tibia. It's very important, coiling the spring. Now, when we see people who have problems here or problems here go into the deadlift and they try to get that position, that perfect position right there, they don't. They'll often round the back here, the tibia will come too far forward, and these are people who will always migrate to deadlifting with a trap bar. Why? Because it lets them squat their deadlift. And if they're working on the deadlift, they should work on the deadlift, not the squat. So the trap bar allows you to cheat. When we put a straight bar on you or put a kettlebell or a dumbbell on you, you've got that vertical tibia and that arm falls right in front of the tibia, keeping the line of force right there. Develop a lot of tension. All the mistakes we see in deadlifting are an inability to coil the spring, or what happens if you've got a spring and you coil it like this, you're gonna have a stress point. Now the people who are natural born squatters coil their spring very well, and so they push right up. Same thing with natural deadlifters. If you've ever watched Brett Jones do a deadlift, he literally coils the spring. And if you've seen me coach the deadlift or Brett coach the deadlift on like key functional exercises, then what you're gonna see is I'll have somebody bend over and get into position 20 times before I ever let them lift the weight off the floor. It is absolutely so fatiguing getting into this position that when I do give them permission to lift the weight, it's almost relaxing because I'm trying to make coiling the spring the difficult part of the exercise. Because if you coil the spring correctly, the lift almost happens automatically. And we see babies actually do the deadlift. So when we're learning to do the deadlift, this going back, this staying vertical, and this staying aligned basically compress a perfect spring. Now here's the problem. If you try to go too low, you're gonna go past the spring's efficiency point. If you don't coil the spring enough, same problem. So every spring likes to be coiled a certain amount. Now when we get into deadlifting, arbitrary things tell you, and that weight should be a little bit further back, 2 45-pound plates in a straight bar give me an arbitrary distance off the floor. But that's not really fair to different body types that may have a long torso, long femur, or whatever. As long as I see that lordotic curve in the back, the hips drop back and the arms fall in that same vertical plane as the tibia, we got a good deadlift position. For a 65-year-old trying to get back in shape, that may be a kettlebell deadlift or a sandbag out of a chair. They're literally straddling a chair. But it's a very efficient lift because what you see in a good deadlift is the universal athletic ready position. So, a couple of things. A lot of people are overcoaching the deadlift. I think 80% of the problem is you got somebody who can't pass this or somebody who can't pass this trying to do a deadlift. If they can pass that and pass that, all you got to do is show them how to coil the spring. And I got one neat trick for you. When we're setting up somebody to do a deadlift, and I'm going to get us a little space here on the board. When we're setting up somebody to do a deadlift, what we've got is that motion. Now, how can I pattern this motion? Well, just showing somebody how to do it, they got the weight right here, they know they got to pull it up. However, we learn in reverse many times. So if I've got me a really thick band, or I've got a free motion system, cable column, Kaiser, it doesn't matter. We can actually have you hold your arms right here, grab something, and do a standing sit-up. So imagine you're starting in a standing position, the weight is pulling you up into the back. You grab that weight and you literally are pulling down. It's gonna reinforce a stable spine, but it's really gonna show you how to coil that spring. So one of the ways we do this is we give you a pretty respectable weight back here. We have you pull that weight down. Now, if you lean back too far on your heels, what's gonna happen? Well, you're gonna be pulled off balance. If you go too far forward, you're gonna be pulled off balance. So your own balance reactions actually help you reinforce the movement, which is called reactive neuromuscular training. I wrote about it in a movement book. Hold that weight, make it a lot, and have them pull down into the position. Now, once they're pulled down and if they look good, take off one hand. Look where that hand falls. That's about where they need to be deadlifting from the first time. But make them pattern coiling the spring. I would have no problem if you spent almost 3 sessions coiling the spring before you ever let them do a lift. You could even have a one-hand pull down to a kettlebell or dumbbell and then a stand up with the weight so they could feel tension in both places. But I want you to understand, and I'm not a great example of this, but Brett Jones is, when he's coaching, everything he says and everything he does is to get you to compress this spring so you can use the efficiency of the spring to lift the weight and not just use it as a gut check. The deadlift creates a foundation for so many athletic movements and so many popular fitness movements today, like the swing and any type of overhead press you would do, farmer's carry, snatch. All of that comes from an efficient hip hinge because that's where we want to take our biggest weights. I hope that helped. I hope that explains something. And I hope you understand if you're overcoaching the deadlift, you might not have checked this box, you might not have a toe touch, and you might not realize how important coiling that spring is. The best people do it, and they sometimes can't even describe why, but that's how they do it.
If you would like more information about this topic, please visit functionalmovement.com.